Welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Middle East News Hour. I am your hostess, Carolyn Glick. And in just a bit, we're going to be hosting one week before the elections. We're going to be talking with Likud MK Yoav Kish about how he views the state of the race and a bunch of other issues, including the gas deal and that the Lapid caretaker government is ramming down our throats just days before the election. We're going to talk to him about that, and we'll talk to him about legal reform and a host of other issues coming up. But before that, just a couple of words of my own, both on the gas deal and some other issues. So just this morning, the Supreme Court unanimously handed down a decision approving Lapid's efforts to, as caretaker, prime minister of a caretaker government, push forward with this gas deal where Israel gives up 10 square kilometers of our territorial waters and another 840 square kilometers of our economic waters, including all of our sovereign natural resources that are located in the continental shelf below, to Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon. And we're doing it under the gun with Hezbollah threatening to attack our our Karish gas platform if we don't succumb to all of Hezbollah's demands. And on the face of this is absolutely a breach of Israel's constitutional law. We have a referendums law which says that any international deal that requires Israel to surrender sovereign territory requires the approval of 2/3 of the Knesset or the approval of a majority of the public in a referendum in order to come into force. And Lapid not only refuses to operate under the aegis of the referendums law, which applies in this case, but he says that the Knesset isn't worthy of even having a vote to approve this deal because the opposition is acting in what he refers to as obnoxiously or some such thing, and therefore they don't have a right to vote on the deal. That is, they don't have a right to vote on the deal because they oppose it, and the is going along with this, saying absolutely, Bibi Netanyahu only opposes this deal because he's a meanie. At any rate, this, on the face of it, should never have received the approval not only of the Attorney General but of the Supreme Court, and it should never have been put through. But the Supreme Court ruling and really the behavior of Attorney General Gali Miara Ba'arav in this case shows that we really do need legal reform, because right now we don't have a democracy ruled by the rule of law. We have a two-tier justice system where right-wing governments, caretaker governments, and otherwise aren't allowed to do anything. And left-wing governments, including caretaker governments with no democratic mandate from the public, like the Lapid government, are allowed to do whatever they want, including radical deals with terrorist organizations controlled by Iran. And so, we desperately need legal reform in this country, but we're only going to get it, obviously, if we have a 61-seat right-wing bloc or more voted into office next week on November 1st. And there are 4 parties in that bloc. It's Likud, it's the Religious Zionism Party, Shas, and United Torah Judaism. And anybody else claiming to be in the bloc is not, including Yair Lapid's Interior Minister Ayelet Shaked. But that's a different issue. But there are 4 parties in that bloc, and if they don't get 61 seats between them, then our two-tier justice system is going to get worse, and the kind of surrender that we're seeing vis-a-vis Hezbollah, Lebanon, Iran is going to be implemented very quickly in Judea and Samaria, which I'm going to get to in a second. But first, regarding Iran. So while Israel is doing this under the gun of Hezbollah and at the demand, in accordance with the demand of the Biden administration, we're doing it at a time when the regime that stands most to benefit from this, Iran, is in the throes of a revolution. And we see it on the streets of Iran. I actually just wrote an article that'll be appearing on Tuesday in Newsweek about this revolution. It's wrongly characterized as a protest movement. It's not, because the protesters, whether they're steel workers or miners or oil industry workers, refinery industry workers, students, clerics, who else is on strike? Who else is part of the demonstration? Schoolgirls, people from all walks of life, Kurds, Azerbaijanis, Baluchis, all the ethnic minorities in Iran. They're not calling for better pensions, cultural autonomy, more women's rights. They're all calling for the overthrow of the regime because they understand that this regime can't be reformed. It can't be reformed because it is an ideologically rigid regime, which Masih Alinejad, one of the leaders of the women's protest movement, wrote in Foreign Affairs last week. She explained there are three ideological pillars of this regime: misogyny, hatred of the United States, and hatred of Israel. This is a regime that fundamentally cannot reform itself because it exists for its ideology. Its ideology doesn't allow it to reform, particularly in relation to women's rights and human rights. So this is not a protest. Everybody from all walks of life, all ethnic groups are calling for the overthrow of the regime. And you would expect for the United States to be its primary supporter and doing everything that the United States could in order to help the revolutionaries overthrow this regime. This is the world's greatest state sponsor of terrorism, among other things. Obviously, proliferating nuclear weapons. Hackers just got into the emails, hacked into the emails of Iran's Atomic Energy Agency, and they posted yesterday. You can look on my Twitter feed. I put it up. Videos of the nuclear reactor at Bushehr, among other things. But you have the United States doing the exact opposite of what you would expect. The Biden administration is enabling this Iranian regime in two ways. First, it's maintaining its complete support for the nuclear deal. Robert Malley said last week that the nuclear deal with Iran is the only way to proceed. Diplomacy is the only way to proceed. Now, they call it the nuclear deal, but it's actually not about nuclear nonproliferation. We've spoken about this repeatedly on this show and in my writing. I've talked about it for 20 years now. Iran is not developing the nuclear reactor at Bushehr and the uranium centrifuge plants in places like Isfahan and Qom because they want to have radioactive isotopes for X-rays or anything else. They're building nuclear weapons. This was made clear by the nuclear archive that Israel was able to seize and take out of Iran in 2018. So the idea of a nuclear deal with Iran is not to block Iran from becoming a nuclear armed state. It's to appease Iran and enable their nuclear weapons program to go forward with here and there, really just a public relations stunt, slowed down nuclear projects in this area and uranium enrichment, but you can go forward in ballistic missile development and the development of advanced centrifuges. And that's all under the deal that Obama agreed with Malley and Biden and all the rest of them in 2014. And that's a deal that they're trying to renegotiate now. So it's not a deal that blocks Iran from becoming a nuclear power. It is a deal that tries to realign the United States with an Iran that through the deal it will become a hegemonic power in the Middle East with nuclear weapons, because the deal enriches Iran. If this deal goes forward, according to the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, Iran will immediately be enriched with $275 billion, and by 2030 with $1 trillion. So by maintaining faith with the nuclear diplomacy, the Biden administration is saying, we want to continue on doing this. We want this regime to continue to exist. We want to appease it. This is our policy towards the regime. You can look at the Lebanon deal that they're forcing Israel to capitulate to Hezbollah as another aspect of this, because when you're handing over gas platforms like the Kana gas platform to Iran, which is controlled by Hezbollah, which is controlled by Iran, to Lebanon, which is controlled by Hezbollah, which is controlled by Iran, then you're giving, billions and billions of dollars to Hezbollah, to Iran. It's a way to go around U.S. sanctions against Hezbollah, which is an illegal terrorist organization, and it's a way to get the United States around the sanctions on Iran, which is the world's greatest state sponsor of terrorism and a nuclear proliferator. So this is, on the one hand, U.S. policy. The other policy is that they're actually they're not supporting the revolutionaries in the street. And we saw this very clearly last week. Secretary of State Tony Blinken met with what he referred to as civil society representatives at the State Department. Robert Malley was there too. And between the people that he met with was a woman named Sherry Hakimi. Sherry Hakimi is not, she's not be in the army, so in that sense, she's a civilian, but she is a regime lobbyist. And everybody who is anybody in the circles of the Iranian opposition movements knows that Sherry Hakimi works for the regime. She enables the regime. She legitimizes the regime. She justifies the regime and their genocidal designs, both on the Iranian people, Iranian women, and of course against Israel and the United States. So they had her there with some real members of the opposition in order to legitimize her as a voice of the people in Iran. And then, not surprisingly, Sherry Hakimi put out a list of the people for the media to interview about the protests in Iran, and almost all of the people on her list were Iranian regime lobbyists, supporters, sympathetic reporters, and the rest of it. So that this was all an effort to undermine the revolution by putting forth a narrative in the U.S. media that the revolutionaries aren't serious. They're not really revolutionaries at all. They're just protesting, and this will pass, and there's no reason to support them, and there's no reason to see this as anything unusual, or for that matter, the best chance we've had of seeing this regime overthrown since it came into power with the Islamic Revolution in 1979. So that's what they did. And by the way, one of the people on that list was this woman named Negar Mordevezi, who is herself a regime apologist, and she gave an interview last week saying, there's nothing to see here, folks, move on. This is just a protest movement. No way that this is going to bring down the regime again. It's to tell people that there's no reason for the United States to change gears, and it's appeasement of the mullahs. And they all say, don't put any sanctions on Iran. It'll only hurt the protesters. This is not true. And again, why is the Biden administration doing this? They're doing this with Hezbollah. They're doing this against Israel. They're doing it against Saudi Arabia because they are guided by this anti-colonialist worldview. We saw it with Obama. We see it now with Biden and all of his advisors, that says that there's something fundamentally authentic and legitimate about the mullahs because they're an authentic anti-American, anti-Western revolutionary movement. They hate the West. The West deserves to be hated because it had colonialism, and that was very bad. And therefore, they're justified in their hatred of the United States. And the only way that the United States can handle this very legitimate hatred of the United States is by paying it off. So in that sense, the Iranian revolution, the Iranian nuclear deal, and the deal that they're forcing down Israel's throat with Hezbollah and Lebanon, are really the only legitimate possible foreign policies you can have towards such a legitimate, revolutionary, authentic regime. And the other aspect of this that blinds them to what's happening, both in terms of Iran's threat to the United States and to its allies and to its core interest in the Middle East, but also to the Iranian people, is they can't countenance the anti-colonialist worldview, cannot countenance the concept that the Iranian people actually don't share the regime's hatred either of women or of Israel or of the United States of America. So Barack Obama gave this interview last week where he said, in 2009, we were wrong, but the reason that we didn't support the Green Revolution after the regime stole the presidential elections and reinstated Mahmoud Ahmadinejad as president was because we didn't want to harm the protesters on the streets of Tehran by supporting them. They would have been castigated as regime stooges. But the people already are. I mean, Khamenei gave one statement on the revolution, and he said that everybody in the streets, they're all stooges of the Zionists and of the United States, and the crowds just keep growing because nobody cares what he says, because they don't actually share the regime's hatred of Israel and the United States and women. And so for an anti-colonialist like Rob Malley or Tony Blinken or any of the others in the Biden administration, this doesn't compute, because how can you possibly have Iranians not hating the United States? So if the United States says anything in their favor, then they definitely aren't going to stop. But they're not going to stop because they don't hate the United States, and they don't hate Israel, and they don't hate women. They hate the regime, and they want the regime to go. And they don't consider it an authentic representative of a authentic anti-colonialist revolution. They consider it a tyrannical regime, a misogynistic regime, a terror-supporting regime, a corrupt regime that is impoverishing them, destroying their lives, destroying the country that they love, and endangering the entire world, and therefore they want to bring it down. So the administration is actually trying to subvert it by this two-faced policy regarding the revolutionaries, and we all really have to do everything that we can to make clear that this is wrong and that the United States should be supporting them, as should the Europeans. 100,000 people came out in Berlin in support of the revolution yesterday, which was fantastic. And hopefully the German government will start expelling Iranian diplomats from Germany. That would be amazing. But we'll have to wait and see whether that happens. And one of the main beneficiaries, one of the big beneficiaries, not only is Hezbollah of Iranian support for terrorism, but the Palestinians. And right now, again, a week ahead of the elections, we're really seeing the stake in the elections in two ways vis-a-vis the Palestinians. The first one is that we are seeing a massive escalation of terrorism, terrorist attacks by all Palestinian factions in Judea and Samaria against Israel. The Lion's Den, the ostensibly new terrorist organization that's sort of the epicenter of the attacks, at least in the Shechem, Nablus area. According to Baruch Yadid, my friend and colleague at Channel 14, the Arab Affairs advisor there, is that this is a new organization that's sort of funded by Iran, and it includes terrorists from Islamic Jihad, Fatah, Hamas, all operating together, sort of like the popular resistance committees that we saw in the Palestinian terror war of 2000 to 2004, but with a lot of external Iranian funding. At any rate, we're seeing what we may look back at later as the beginning of a new Palestinian terrorist war. And one aspect of this that's really important is just how mobilized Palestinian society is in terms of this war. And here, we had this incredible video late last week of a terrorist who jumped out in front of the security cameras at the checkpoint at the entrance to the city of Ma'ale Adumim in the Benjamin region, just north of Jerusalem in Judea. And he jumped out in front of the checkpoint, and he holding a pistol in his hand, and he started shooting at the security guards, who shot back, and he was shot a couple of times. You see it. He's lying on the ground, and he's continuing to shoot at them. And then after a while, they kill him. They shoot him in the chest after he's been shot, I think, in the butt and the leg or something. He gets shot in the chest, and he stops moving. And then a security guard comes. You see his leg. He kicks the gun out of the terrorist's hand. Works out that the terrorist who was killed was a terrorist who 10 days ago, he's been on the lam for 10 days after he killed an Israeli border police woman and critically injured another security guard at the Chizme security checkpoint outside of Jerusalem. And so I don't know, maybe he couldn't hide anymore. He decided to go out with a bang, or bang, bang, bang. And so he went up to a place where basically there was no chance that he would emerge alive, and he filmed his death. He staged his death. He knew that there were security cameras there, and lo and behold, as day follows night, was posted. And what's notable is, so he staged his death. He wanted everybody to see him going out fighting. And then, on the one hand, Israel put it out because it, just shows how professional our security guards are. But on the other hand, when I was watching this, I said, oh my gosh, this is going to become a snuff film that the Palestinians are going to use, like even more than Mohammed al-Dura, as an inspiration for other Palestinians to join and shoot up Israeli Jews. And lo and behold, Abu Ali Express, the intelligence blogger, just posted this video of children, I think in Hebron, with toy guns, reenacting the scene of Tamimi, the terrorist, shooting up and shooting until he dies. So this, he immediately became a hero, and a rallying call for more Palestinians to take up arms against Jews. And so that's happening. That's the nature of this population. And it's not only in Judea and Samaria, it's in Israel as well. On October 21st, Yediot Achronot's military commentator Yossi Yoshua reported that there's been another mass theft of ammunition from an IDF base. We're talking about, I'm just looking, nearly 30,000 rounds of ammunition for Negev machine guns, for mag machine guns that have been stolen, and for for regular rifles. Um, and so this is going on as well. And this is the Israeli Arab sector that's apparently the first suspects anyway in a kind of theft of this type, because this is sort of textbook case. And this goes back to my conversation a couple of weeks ago with retired Brigadier General F.E.A. Tom, who looks at things like this and the massive gunshots that we hear almost every night in the Negev and in parts of the Galilee, where you have high concentrations of Israeli Arabs or Israeli Bedouin, that they're actually training an army. And theft of this nature and of this dimension of ammunition from a military base, as we've seen, seems to speak to his thesis and make clear the very, high stakes in the selection. And the last thing that I want to say about that is just, Zahava Galon, who's the head of the Meretz Party, which is a member of the caretaker government's coalition, and will be a member of a coalition if one is formed either by Yair Lapid or by Benny Gantz. It's a post-Zionist party, and if the right wing fails to get 61 seats on next week, then this caretaker government is going to carry on, and it'll continue in power until after sixth election, or seventh, or an eighth, or a ninth, until we get a clear reading on who's in charge. So this is a very powerful party, and Zahava Galon, who's the new chairwoman of the party, said that she wants it to be in the guidelines of a new government under Lapid that Israel has to engage in negotiations with the Palestinians. So on the one hand, you see Palestinian society completely mobilized against Israel from the top down, from Mahmoud Abbas down to the little boys in the street reenacting Tamimi's staged death scene. And this is not only her policy, this is Yair Lapid's policy, and it's also Benny Gantz's policy. The defense minister, Benny Gantz, as defense minister, not only has he allowed or invited PLO chief PA leader Mahmoud Abbas over to his house. I mean, Mahmoud Abbas just met with Putin, right, and Iran's leaders last week, and expressed complete fealty to Putin and hatred of the United States. But again, under the post-colonialist foreign policy, the Palestinians, like the mullahs in Iran, are in the right, and Israel is in the wrong. And so Benny Gantz has been illegally, under Israeli law, we have a Taylor Force law that bars us from giving money to the Palestinian Authority because it funds terrorism. But he gave them hundreds of millions of shekels anyway. He found some sort of excuse, which was illegal, but again, we have a two-tiered legal system, so it doesn't matter, nobody cares. And then he, more importantly, just as Lapid is unlawfully, but again with the support of the political legal fraternity, giving up our sovereign waters and our sovereign natural resources and national resources on the seabed in the Eastern Mediterranean, and transforming Hezbollah and Iran into actors in the Eastern Mediterranean gas industry. So again, in contravention of Israeli law, but who cares really? Benny Gantz has been giving tens of thousands of square acres of state land to the Palestinian Authority in Area C. Area C is the area of Judea and Samaria that Israel ostensibly administers. It includes all of the military installations, all of the Israeli communities. 500,000 Israelis live in Israeli communities in Judea and Samaria, including yours truly. Benny Gantz, under Benny Gantz, he's allowing massive land theft all over our communities by the Palestinian Authority. He's going after Jews who dare to build in areas that haven't been 150% cleared for Jewish construction, but the Arabs are allowed to steal areas that are 150% clearly land that's slated for Jewish construction. So this is what he's doing already now, and if he's allowed to continue on with what he's doing, if we don't get to a clear verdict in the next elections, with the right wing getting a clear-cut 61-seat majority to be able to form a functioning government, then we're going to get much more of this. And if the left is able to form a government or not and just continues on in the caretaker role, we're going to see a reenactment of what we saw in Lebanon, in Judea and Samaria, without any question. So those are my remarks. I think this is probably going to be the last time that I preach to you guys before our elections, but these elections are about everything. Everything is really up for grabs. Israel's Jewish character, I think we're going to talk about this with Yoav Kish in just a minute, is really up for grabs here. And it's all about going out and voting for a party that's going to protect Israel's Jewish identity and not for a party that's going to, or already is, like in Ayelet Shaked's case, sitting in partnership with the Muslim Brotherhood in the caretaker government. So without further ado, I think we're going to move to the interview. So welcome to Yoav Kish, member of Knesset. Thanks for being on the program.
Hi, Karen. Good to be here.
It's great to finally have you on the show. I know we've spoken about it in the past, and now a week before the elections, I thought was a good time to bring you on. Yoav Kish is one of the top members of Likud. I think in the primaries put you in sixth place or something in the Likud.
Sixth place. Yes, which means I'm number 7 now in the Likud list after Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's the first.
Well, that's a really stunning achievement. I mean, you really managed to upgrade your status in the party list in the primary. So first of all, congratulations on your achievement. And second of all, just to give a little background on you for our viewers and our listeners, I'll give a little bit, and then you add in whatever you'd like. So when Yoav Kish came into the Likud and then into politics, was after a career as a fighter pilot in the IDF in the Israel Air Force, and then you worked for a while as a pilot for El Al. He comes from an illustrious family. His father is also a military man. He served in the South, I think, as an engineering officer in Yom Kippur. And your grandfather, Friedrich Kish, was a brigadier general in the British Army, who was killed in Tunis in 43, and that was after having commanded the engineering brigades, which, from my readings, played a very large role in blocking Rommel's advance in North Africa. So that's a rather distinguished past.
Yes, my grandfather was actually the highest ranked Jew in the British Army in the World War II, and he was head of engineering of Montgomery. And basically, I even have a letter, handwriting by Montgomery, when he sent it to my grandmother, unfortunately, telling her that my grandfather died on war.
That's something that not many people can say that they have. So that puts you in a pretty distinguished position. And I'd love to have you on just to talk a little bit about the role that the Jews in the land of Israel played in the British Army, and particularly in the fight against Rommel's advance in northern Africa. That's one of the stories that is pretty well. Is a focus of a very important book called The Forgotten Ally, by a Dutch reporter that was written in 43, and basically ascribed the blockage of Rommel's troops to suicide engineering squad of Jews who had made Aliyah from Germany, who were serving in the British Army. But we can talk about that another time. A week before the elections, as I said. What do you make of the state of the race? How do you look at it today? It doesn't seem like there's any movement between the blocks. The right-wing bloc, depending on whose poll, is between 59 on the one hand and 62 on the upper hand. How do you look at it? How do you feel going into the elections next week?
I must tell you that I feel very optimistic. I think that the right-wing voters fully understand how important is this election, in particular to the future of Israel. Israel, we spoke about my grandfather who came and built this country to be a Jewish and democratic state, is actually on the verge of turning itself to something else. What we had here in the last year is something else, is people who wants this country to be without the bright light of the Judaism. They want it to be a state as all states. And there's a huge fight on that future for Israel. And me for, and I guess all other voters for the right, believe in the strong connection of Israel and the Jewish people, and we are going to work hard to make that happen. And we must get back in power. We see what's going on in every aspect, in education, in the international arena, in security, internal relationship. And I think that that's why I'm optimistic, because I think before that, in the last, everybody is saying, what happened? We tried 4 times. Why on the 5th time things will change? Things will change because in the last year, we saw what is the alternative. And many people understand that, and they need to leave their house and go and vote for the Likud, for the right-wing parties, make sure that these parties are passing the block percentage and that their vote is not wasted. And then together we can coordinate a coalition that will bring back Israel to its core.
There are a lot of voters who left the Likud or and voted for the former Likud minister Gideon Sa'ar. I know you briefly were aligned with him and then walked away and didn't join him when he left the Likud. But he really is sort of a stunning tale, and I mean, it's almost like a psychological portrait more than anything else of a guy who was one of the very staunch hawks in the Likud, and he made a name for himself in one of the previous Knessets over the last 3 years as fighting for Jewish land rights in Area C and against illegal Arab land use. And he formed his New Hope party. A lot of Likud voters voted for him. And there is some concern that to the extent he has any electoral weight now, as he runs with Defense Minister Benny Gantz in his party, that it's still coming from those people who are ostensibly identified with the right wing but are voting for him now. And I really just am trying to understand how it's possible that a man like Sa'ar, that just continues to pretend that he's on the right, but he's running under Benny Gantz, who has given is endangering the actual Jewish communities and the military installations in Judea and Samaria today to an unprecedented degree, because he's enabling illegal Arab seizure of state lands in Area C to a degree we've never ever experienced before. Do you have an explanation, and do you have a warning maybe for people who continue to think that?
Yes, I'll talk about 2 persons in that sense. I'll start with Benny Gantz. Benny Gantz and also Eisenkot are the leaders of Hamachaneh HaMamlachti. They are so far from Mamlachtiyut, but leave that aside.
Mamlachtiyut is an Israeli concept, which I think it has parallels in English, but basically it's a concept that the bureaucracy should be placed above the elected leaders of a country. So whether it's the FBI,
I think that's a good definition. I couldn't come with an English name for that, but it's true.
But in America, they're experiencing it as well, I think, with the FBI becoming politicized and the Justice Department in the United States becoming politicized, and even the military ranks becoming politicized. So that's what's going on. So when people talk about the stateliness party, they're basically talking about the rule of the state bureaucracy and appointed officials above elected.
And not only that, that's a true left-wing party. We see it by Benny Gantz inviting Abu Mazen to his home in Rosh Hashanah, and we see it by that this government is pushing forward hundreds of millions of shekels to the Palestinian Authority against the law in order to actually support them and keep them as some factor in the future. And in that sense, they are creating huge damage to Israel and to the Jews who live in the Judea and Samaria, and basically enabling. Benny Gantz and Eisenkot are an enabler for the Palestinian Authority move on Judea and Samaria. And that's something that no right-wing person would do ever. And Gideon Sa'ar found himself step by step. It's like the frog in the cold water that moved from supposedly right-wing opinions to a totally left party that is going to do a huge damage on that sense, on the international area between us and the Palestinian. This party is totally on the other side. Now, back to Gideon Sa'ar, what actually moved him from where he was to where he is today? And I knew him a few years ago, and I actually helped him. What I didn't know is how, what I'm saying is how his hatred to Benjamin Netanyahu blind his mind and his heart. And the fact is that he sold all his there's no ideology anymore with Gideon Sa'ar. Only, as they say in Hebrew, Rak lo Bibi, just not Bibi. And for that, he was willing to move totally to the left and actually create, even, we have an argument not only on the political issue with the Palestinians, but also agenda of how to correct the justice system in Israel. And he came with good ideas. He did nothing, and he actually collapsed on that agenda as well to the other side. So unfortunately, I'm very disappointed. I thought that Gideon Sa'ar, and maybe if he would stay in the Likud, even though his arguments with Netanyahu, to my opinion, should stay in the Likud. If he was really a believer, worked hard in the Likud, I'm sure he was very strong, he had supporters. The fact that he decided to leave the Likud, to leave the right-wing agenda in both aspects, both the political and international arena and in the how to fix and correct the justice system in Israel, moved totally to the left, together with the left people, and he's totally off the grid, to my opinion, for right-wing voters.
There's also a question. I see that in the polls, the inside of the right-wing bloc, there has been a slippage in support for Likud that's moving, apparently, to the religious Zionist party, and specifically to the faction led by Itamar Ben-Gvir in the religious right party. I had Simcha Rotman on last week, and he was talking a lot about the legal reform that the religious Zionism party put forward last week, which is a very explicit, very detailed plan to reform the legal system in Israel and subordinate it to the political leadership of the country, or at least work towards that goal. And I'm just wondering, what would you say is the argument to vote for Likud? And I'll give it to you from another angle as well, which is that I live in Efrat, and there are a lot of people here who are trying to figure out where they stand on the religious secular continuum. They're religious, and they're sort of more liberal in their view of the world than perhaps others might be in the same sector. And so there's this real sense of people not knowing, what works for them the best now, particularly given the demonization of Likud and Netanyahu by the media. So just can you give the pitch for
Yes.
Likud?
First, let's start by saying that Simcha Rotman and, of course, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir are Tzionut Hadatit, are our partners, are part of our right-wing coalition, and that's the coalition that we are fighting very hard to get. And in that sense, we are truly partners on this issue. And as you say, what's the difference between the Likud, which is like the main asset of the right and the main party, and also the party that should rule and should lead the agenda in comparison to the Zionist religious party? I think that's, I don't know how you translate their name accurately.
The religious
But
Zionism
the main thing
party,
is that how we say?
I think religious Zionism party, Tzionut Hadatit.
Religious Zionism. And I think the first word, it might be the difference. The Likud is not a religious party. The Likud is a liberal party. We are very strong with our Judaism. We spoke about it before. We're very connected to the religion, but we are not religious. And we believe in liberal economy, liberal way of life, and we are not forcing ourselves on other people I'm not saying that they are, but that's the main difference. And if you look at both what the corrections that need to be done to the justice system You just need, they put their plan. We have our plans. You need to see the bills that I had put in the previous government and Knesset. And then, for example, Yariv Levin, which is a major pusher on that, he pushes that all the time. So we're going to go deeply into that issue once we'll create the next coalition, and we'll decide on what are the steps and what are the right moves. We have their plan, our plan, and we'll coordinate that to one plan that will have to come out, because this is something crucial to the future of the Israeli state, of Israel state. And the other thing is, and also regarding the Likud today, I don't see much difference in the way we treat the future of Israel in Judea and Samaria. Prime Minister Netanyahu always say that peace should come from strength and not giving land for peace, and it should be peace for peace, like we did with the Emirates and the 4 different peace agreements that we managed to do. So I think you won't see that differences. You would see the differences, for example, in how you would treat public transportation in Shabbat. They are very much against it, and so are the ultra-Orthodox. We might look into find compromises. We believe strongly on the status quo, and we're not going to change the status quo in the religion, not to any side, without agreements. That's the way I think we need to move forward. There should be discussion on that, but of course we wouldn't do things like this government did in regarding kashrut, and regarding phones, and regarding so many things that they were trying to impose on the religious people. We are not there. We believe you have a status quo. You want to move from the status quo, you have to do it with a dialogue from both sides. And once you get an agreement and you can manage it, that's fine. But you're not forcing your way to any other side.
Okay. One of the things when you talk about the 4 peace deals that Israel got under the framework of the Abraham Accords in the last government, before the current Lapid-Bennett Muslim Brotherhood government came into power, now Lapid, the caretaker Prime Minister Lapid, is intending to have a very strange signing ceremony at Nakura along the border with Lebanon, with the government of Lebanon, which is controlled by Hezbollah, for a gas deal where Israel surrenders a large quantity of its territorial waters and its economic waters to Lebanon, which is controlled by
disputed territory, not the large. All the disputed territory is given to Lebanon. So there's no single benefit for Israel, except, as you mentioned, surrendering all the disputed territory.
So there are 2 questions that I'd like to ask you. One is as a former fighter pilot. I think you're a lieutenant colonel in the IDF, and the other one as a politician, as a lawmaker, and probably, if the right wing forms the next government, as a minister in the next government. And the first question that I want to ask you, which I find incredibly troubling, is that according to all the reports, the general staff of the army and the other security services all support this deal, and Lapid is arguing that that this is an excellent deal because everybody in the army supports it, and that we're supposed to take on trust that surrendering all of our strategic and economic assets in those areas to Lebanon, which is controlled by Hezbollah, is an excellent idea because of this support. How do you explain the seeming apparent unanimity of opinion among the leadership of the IDF that it's a good idea to just collapse on all strategic deterrence towards Hezbollah and surrender completely lock, stock, and barrel to their territorial demands in our economic waters and our sovereign waters?
I'll start maybe a little bit earlier. At 2010, Lebanon put their line. It's called line number 23. At 2011, less than a year after, we put our line called line number 1. The difference areas between line number 1 and line number 23 is 860 square kilometers. That's 17 times the size of Tel Aviv. At that area, only 10 square kilometers are part of territorial waters, which means they are under 12 miles from the shore. And most of the land is 850 is economic waters. That's the disputed area, which has been in dispute for 10 years. And the discussion was, Either Israel is going to get 45%, 40%, and we were still negotiating for 10 years. In this current government, and it's even not in Bennett's government, because Bennett, when he was shown the results, we got to a different place and to a different agreement, but he still supports it. And why am I saying that is because what they actually did is they decided to give up everything. They kind of said there is an excuse because there is a short window of opportunity in the Lebanese government because the president is still in power, and that's not for so long. It's opposite. There was a short window of opportunity with this weak government of Lapid that was willing to give basically all the disputed area was given to Lebanon. Now then, going back to your question, how come the security forces supported that move? And I tell you, because I think that that's actually is more a strategic and political decision. If you look at the security issues, basically they are avoiding a conflict, which might have happened. I don't know if there would be a conflict. I think they made a huge mistake by giving up to Lebanon. If they would continue the discussions like we did 10 years, nothing would happen. But Lapid was scared by Hezbollah move that he sent drones to the Karish gas and was threatening that he would escalate in case he's not going to give up to Lebanon. Lapid just proved again and again and again that he's weak, that he's not a leader. He decided to give up. And when you got to the security forces, he told them, listen, guys, is that bad? I mean, I'm avoiding a conflict for them. Avoiding conflict in the short future, I think, was the answer. There's no problem. We support. If you look at strategic and long-term relationship between the states, between Israel as a state that has its power and that is fighting for its agenda and not giving up, this is a huge damage. By the way, the damage has been done already. I don't see how this thing is going to change. But we got bad agreements in the past, we'll try to reduce the damage in the future. Unfortunately, that also gives us the prospects to see what can happen when a weak left government, which is basically stands on the votes of the Arab anti-Zionist parties, can do to Israel. This is an example that is only on the north border in the water, but this can immediately move into Judea and Samaria, the north border, many other places, because if you give up on everything that you have in order to satisfy your enemy, then you're in a bad shape. That's exactly what happened in Lebanon, by the way. It's not an agreement with Lebanon. It's exchanging letters, Israel with the U.S., Lebanon with the U.S. There's no any recognition of Lebanon in Israel. This is not a peace agreement. It's a giving up, not agreement, letters to the U.S., and unfortunately, that is the actual proof why Lapid is so dangerous to Israel in the future.
You know, you had said a few weeks ago when Benny Gantz started announcing that during the caretaker government's period in office, he was intending to appoint the next chief of staff. You said that the next government will cancel the appointment because it's unconscionable that a week and a half. We're speaking on Sunday morning. And the government is supposed to convene today to approve the appointment of General Herzi Halevi, to be the next chief of staff.
I was not regarding the appointment. I was not regarding the appointment of the chief of the army. I was referring to the move of the legal advisor, the general attorney. So I was not in direct approach to that current move that she approved it. I talked about her approving such a decision means that she is a political advisor.
So you want to fire the attorney general?
And I said, I don't want to fire anybody. Let's start. It created a big fuss. I'll tell you exactly what I mean. So maybe sorry, I'm cutting you in the middle of the question, but I just want to make the things accurate. In the middle of election, when we have this kind of government of a diffusion state, this government, when it was a right-wing government, was totally, how would I say, handicapped by the general attorney. Now we're in a different situation. We have a left government, and it seems that the general attorney, which was nominated by them not recently, is actually enabling them to do almost everything. By the way, that's fine. I'm not against it. I think maybe that's even the right thing to do in the future. But the problem is the way you treat a right-wing government and the left-wing government so differently, and that's part of the reforms that we need to do. And going back to what I mentioned, I said, listen, if she chose to be a political legal advisor or general attorney, when we come into power, we can fire her. That's in our authority. The government, the new government of Israel, hopefully right-wing government that should come in the next month or two, should be able to implement its agenda. And if the general attorney, by the way, will understand that and will participate and coordinate with us the same as she is doing with the left government, maybe she could stay in power and where she is. That's no problem. But if she will decide to be against us and to take a political stand against the chosen government, that is something that shouldn't happen. And the legal advisor and the general attorney should be there in order to help any government to exercise the right to be in power and to implement agenda.
You know, you said there's only 10 kilometers, square kilometers of Israel's territorial waters that are going to be given up. And I just want to mention that, of course, this is illegal under Israel's constitutional law. And I don't quite understand how this is possibly being enabled not only by the Attorney General, but also by the Supreme Court, because that really means that, you guys can decide that you don't feel like dealing with the Rosh Hashanah anymore, which is part of Israeli sovereign territory, and just say, here, Hezbollah, take Rosh Hashanah. Why do we need it? We don't need it. We don't want it anymore. Take it away from us. I mean, this is already piece by piece taking apart not areas that are under dispute in Judea and Samaria from the Six-Day War, but we're talking about areas that are not in dispute from the 19.
You know what's so strange about it, and the line which I mentioned before that was given by Lebanon in 2010, that for a decade we've been arguing about, more than a decade, it's actually what we got. So it's instead of putting our line, which was our rights and mobilities, our territorial area, we should have just accepted that line at 2010 and that's it. There will be no discussion. So I totally agree with you. They try to find some kind of legal excuse why it's okay and why that's not has to come to court. And that's what the legal advisor, the general attorney said on that particular issue. But again, the problem is that if we were dealing with a right-wing government, you would see total different approach from both general attorney and from the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, these are players in the political arena, and we need to fix it.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's the most urgent, urgent matter to take up in the next government if the right wing is able to emerge victorious from these elections. Just a couple more points. Yesterday, 80,000 people, or actually the latest count was 100,000 people, turned up in Berlin to protest on behalf of, in solidarity with the revolutionaries on the streets in Iran, calling for and fighting for the overthrow of the regime. And I know that, our focus has always been the nuclear program there that poses an existential threat to Israel. When you look at the extraordinary events on the ground in Iran, if you were in government today, and if hopefully you'll be in government tomorrow, what would you think that Israel's approach to them should be? Because right now our government is empowering Iran through Hezbollah in Lebanon by giving them our sovereign territory and natural resources. How would you advise Prime Minister Netanyahu to regard the events on the ground in in Iran?
Prime Minister Netanyahu is the most experienced person in the, I don't know if to call it exactly conflict by the crisis that Iran is creating in the region. Iran is a terrorist state that said many times that they want to destroy Israel and they're looking for nuclear power, and that threat is something that we need to take as serious as it can get. And Prime Minister Netanyahu did that, and he moved and shifted the public awareness and public agenda in the US in order to block that move. And with the Trump administration, we canceled the bad agreement that was signed during the Obama administration, and it was a huge move towards maybe what's happening today in Iran. I mean, and I'm strongly support of the Iranian people. I mean, they are, like us, facing an extreme regime that is implementing terror not only outside of Iran, also in Iran. And this is something that has to stop. I mean, we need to do whatever we can in every aspect, in every agenda, in every arena to, let's say, stop the aggressiveness of Iran towards the other countries. And also, I mean, also to the Iranian people. And I think this is something that, it's not for a short discussion here. But as I started to say again, if you look at the future of Israel, if you look at the challenges of Israel, that stands in number one. And we see that Lapid simply does not understand that Gantz have no idea they're actually acting opposite to Israel interest in that sense. And this is why these couple are so dangerous. And this is why Israel has to go back to right-wing government with Benjamin Netanyahu that led that effort worldwide for more than a decade. And I think it's time that we'll continue to lead this effort and make the change that is needed in that arena.
All right, and one last question about the Palestinians. And we talked briefly about what's happening in Area C, but what we're seeing now, just in the weeks before the election, is that there really is a very, very steep escalation in Palestinian terrorist attacks against Israelis throughout Judea and Samaria, in Jerusalem. Over Shabbat, we had another very, very horrific terrorist attack in Jerusalem where a Palestinian 16-year-old terrorist stabbed a Jew walking through a park in the back and nearly killed him. So, I mean, and just incredible commitment on the part of the Palestinians to die, if necessary, killing Israelis at every. We saw video clips in Ma'ale Adumim of the terrorists just jumping out and waiting to be killed and shooting until he was killed by the security guards at the entrance to Ma'ale Adumim. This is real. I'm trying to, it's like an obsession, that this is what is moving them, that by just simply to kill and to fight and to be mobilized towards the goal of destroying Israel.
We see during the last year a huge decline in the personal security of, I wouldn't say Israelis, I would say Jews in Israel, because the Jews are the targets. The Jews are the one who's been under the attack of Palestinians, of Arabs. Unfortunately, some of them are also Israeli Arabs, even though majority are Palestinians. And this is something that has to stop. And it won't stop when you have in power a left government together with the Muslim Brotherhood and maybe even the Ta'al Hadash, that's the extremist party of the Arab anti-Zionist parties. And on their votes, actually this government came into power. On their votes, they're going to stay in power if we're not going to get to change that that current reality in the future, in the 1st of November. So we have to do it in order to save our security. And I think that we always had issues of security, personal security in Israel. We're in a region where we haven't yet been accepted as a Jewish and democratic state. And I think that the iron wall of Jabotinsky, which was established 100 years ago, is so right. And so, even as today, the only way that the Arabs will stop their violence against Jews here in Israel is when they understand that they have no future on that path. And as long as this government is in power, that statement is not standing strong. And we have to bring it back. We have to be back in power in order to do that. And that means back in the streets, more power to the police, more power to the army, and not depend on Arab parties that actually has different interests than the Jewish and democratic state.
I agree. And okay, one last question. One of the reasons that a lot of people, Likud voters, are saying that they want to vote for Itamar Ben-Gvir is because of the problem with Arab Israelis and because of the fear that Netanyahu as he did in 2009 and in 2011 and in 2013, is going to turn first towards the parties in the left-wing bloc and see if he can form a government that's going to include them, and that's then going to block a future government from taking any kind of significant action, either on legal reform or in military operations or actions towards, anti-Israel elements, violent anti-Israel elements inside of the Israeli Arab community. What would you do to tell voters that are looking at the record and wondering whether they can trust Netanyahu to take the kind of action from the right that is required in building a new coalition government?
I tell them that that there will be no other government. If we have the 61, and that's, where I'm still saying it because that's the main thing. Without the 61, we cannot do that. 61, 62, 63. The government is going to be a right-wing government. We want to make the change. The Likud is committed to the change as a big and leading and governing party. It's not only Netanyahu, it's all the Knesset member of the Likud. So the security, the personal security that has been so deterred in the last year, the fact that we have to change and bring back the support of the people to the legal system because we lost it totally. These are the things the Likud is going to lead, and we know no way we can do it with the left-wing parties, no way. So we're not here in order to be tied with by their agenda. We're here to make the change. And the fact is that the Likud has to be as strong as it can be because we need to keep the financial ministry in our hands. We need to keep the security ministry in our hands. And we need to implement with our people the agenda in order to correct these things. And we, as I started our conversation, Ben Gvir and Smotrich and Rotman are our partners. Together with ultra-Orthodox religious people, we're going to make this government and we're going to make the change. But you need a strong Likud in order to have a government that is going to stay here for many years and to be stable. The more the Likud is stronger, the government will be more stable. And we're going to go to make the changes because we are committed to them. We saw what happened. We didn't have majority in the previous government. We had to take guns into because and we saw what happened, how this government was so disabled to make anything. So we know what we need to do. That's our blood. That's our agenda. We're going to do it, but we need the Likud to be strong in order to be stable and to control the most important ministries to make this happen.
Okay. All right. Well, with those words, I really appreciate it, and I wish you the best of luck next week, and I look forward, God willing, to.
I hope that will be for the state of Israel.
Me too, and I hope that once you're a minister in the next government, God willing, you'll come back and we'll talk more about the issues of the day. Okay, guys. Well, that's a wrap. I'm so glad that you were able to join me in the Middle East News Hour this week, and I hope you'll join me next week. Make sure that you tune into all of JNS's programming by subscribing to our YouTube page, and I'll see you again next week. Take care.